Okay, and we are live. Welcome to Monday Meets at the Willow Domestic Violence Center. This is our online program that started with the pandemic in order for us to let people know about what we were doing in a way that was safe for everybody, where we talk about agency programs, folks, and what we do. And this is January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month. So we're very excited to kick off our Monday Meets for 2022 with Maddie Lockett, our Human Trafficking Program Coordinator. So hi, Maddie, welcome.
Hello, good to be here.
Great to have you here. I just want to let people know, if you have any questions throughout the program, do feel free to leave them in the comments section, and I'll try to address them as we go through them. Also, just to let you know, Maddie's got some fur babies and I've got an actual kid who may be joining us for part of this. So it's going to be a wild ride. We don't know what happens if you hear barking or me being shouted at. That's just the way life works now. Thanks, buddy. Okay, and if you have any questions and you don't feel comfortable leaving them in the comments, you can email me at waverill@willowdvcenter.org, or feel free to call our hotline at 785-843-3333, and you can talk to a trained advocate at any point. It's open 24/7 to provide assistance, information, and help. So Maddie, let's get started talking about you. Can you kind of give us a bio of how you came to be the Human Trafficking Program Coordinator?
Yeah, for sure. So way back before the pandemic was everything, I started as an intern at the Willow as a part of my social work degree. And from there, I just came to really like the Willow. So basically the first shot at employment at the Willow, I took that chance. And originally I was working out in Jefferson County, but I kind of just ended up making my way back to the Human Trafficking Program in the shelter. And then from there, spending a little time in human trafficking in the shelter, I had the opportunity to move up to the program coordinator. So that's kind of how I got there. I had kind of previously had an interest in human trafficking as well, so it kind of worked out pretty good.
Nice. And so how long have you been then the program coordinator? Do you remember?
Oh man. Anytime during the pandemic is super fuzzy, but I think it's since the end of July 2020.
Okay, great. Well, let's talk a little bit about what human trafficking is. And I want to remind people, this is a fairly sensitive subject. So if you need to step away and come back, or if you need to talk to somebody, you can always call our hotline. I'll go ahead and put the number in the comments here while we're going through this. But please take care of yourself. And this is some sensitive material. And if you do have questions, feel free to leave them in the comments or let us know. So yeah, sorry, to go back to it, Maddie, kind of what trafficking is.
So the whole, formal definition is human trafficking is when a trafficker will take an action such as transporting a victim, recruiting a victim, harboring a victim, etc., using physical force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of commercial sex or labor services. Now that's kind of a mouthful. So, at the end of the day, we really kind of highlight human trafficking as exploiting somebody else by forcing them to do something against their will. So that's kind of human trafficking in a couple sentences.
And so one question that when we go out into the world and we're doing presentations about the Willow, one question we often get is, where does human trafficking happen? I think there's some misconceptions about that. So could you maybe talk a little bit to that about where we would see human trafficking?
Yeah, well, the one word answer is everywhere. It happens. A lot of folks think about, human trafficking happening like on the coasts or near, one of our borders where a lot of migration happens. And it definitely happens a lot in those places. It definitely happens a lot in, bigger cities, more densely populated areas. But it does happen, in smaller cities. it definitely happens in places like Kansas as well. Maybe more specifically, we see both sex trafficking and labor trafficking happening in like the hotel industry, cleaning services, massage therapy, places like construction and agriculture. Those are all some industries that we see a lot of it happening in.
It's really, really interesting that you mentioned the sex and labor trafficking, because I think sometimes there's a little bit of confusion of that moniker. Can you talk about kind of those different types of trafficking and how they look in practice?
Yeah, so I mean, when a lot of folks think about human trafficking, the main type that we think about is usually sex trafficking, which, you know, is exploiting somebody through commercial sex, aka sex or sex acts in exchange for money. And it can look like a lot of different things. A lot of times folks are groomed into a commercial and exploitative sex act situation. A lot of times folks are groomed. So unfortunately, traffickers are very smart. They treat it like a business, and they will prey on folks that have some certain vulnerabilities. That can be things like, you know, maybe someone's having trouble at home and their family life is pretty chaotic, or maybe somebody is you know, struggling financially. Things like that, unfortunately, traffickers will see and they'll take advantage of and start kind of providing for folks' needs and gaining their trust and kind of trap them in a situation that way. Lots of times they'll spend lots of money on their victims and turn around and say, hey, you got to pay me back. Now you have to participate in commercial sex to get all that money back. Really, it's an exploitative situation, so that debt is never paid off, but that's how it looks a lot of times when it comes to sex trafficking. Lots of times the person being trafficked is already familiar with the person who is trafficking them, and that's kind of an unfortunate, you know, fact that we see a lot. Somebody with influence over somebody else, it's a lot easier for them to kind of get that control over someone. With labor trafficking, it's kind of similar in that, unfortunately, labor traffickers have their own ways of trapping victims in their situations. A lot of times we'll see with both citizens and non-citizens, they can kind of be trapped in an exploitative situation by maybe the employer is holding whatever legal documents they have. This is especially something that happens with folks who may not be, you know, citizens, or might, you know, have newly migrated over. They'll take, you know, whatever documentation they have and hold it over their head and say they'll, you know, report them somewhere if, you know, they're not, you know, performing the labor acts that they want them to perform. Or you know, sometimes labor traffickers will use fraud to get somebody into a situation. They'll say, hey, you'll make easy money, you'll be able to, you know, help your family out, and it'll be an easy job. You'll be able to make this money real fast, and they turn out not to get paid as much as they were promised, or maybe they're doing work that's a lot more dangerous than they were promised, or maybe it's just, you know, work that they're uncomfortable with, and they're kind of being forced to. Unfortunately, a lot of times labor traffickers will further trap folks in those situations by offering them really low cost housing or even free housing if those people will work with them. So you know, I think we all understand how difficult finding good housing is sometimes. So that's a really easy way for some labor traffickers to kind of trap folks in. So that's kind of how it can look like, at least in terms of how somebody actually, you know, gets what it looks like, at least from how, you know, traffickers are manipulating folks.
I remember when we were facilitating, this was a few years ago, some conversations at the Lawrence Community Shelter, some groups at the Lawrence Community Shelter about human trafficking. And one of the challenges that the Human Trafficking Coordinator at the time ran into was that the person wasn't even aware that they were being trafficked. It was a survival sex situation, and
Mhm.
they just felt like they were doing a simple transaction. They just needed a place to stay. So the
Right.
idea that they were being trafficked, that they were actively being trafficked, was not one that they even thought about. Is that something that we see kind of regularly, or is that more of an anomalous situation?
Well, I would say that's probably one of the more common things that we see. And that's one of the biggest struggles actually of working directly with folks who have gone through human trafficking or, any kind of domestic violence in general, is that a lot of times folks have experienced a form of human trafficking, like you mentioned, survival sex, and they don't recognize that it was such an exploitative situation, and they end up thinking that it was their fault. Before I go further, I do want to clarify survival sex. It is kind of a lesser known part of human trafficking. Survival sex is when somebody, again, when somebody spots someone who's got a vulnerability. Let's maybe use homelessness as an example, since that's kind of what we were talking about. And that person who's experiencing homelessness, they go up to them and say, hey, if you engage in certain sex acts with me, I'll let you sleep on my couch. That is survival sex, is when somebody trades sex for a survival need, again, like a safe roof over their head. It could even be food, water, clothing, things like that. So that is what survival sex is. And as I was saying, that is something we see a lot, both with clients who come into our services as a client who has gone through trafficking, as well as clients who come into our services as identifying as somebody who's gone through domestic violence. A lot of times, folks are trading sex or sex acts for safety. Maybe if I perform this act on with my partner, maybe they will not be violent, or maybe I'll have money to go buy food. And to them it might seem kind of like a choice, because on the outside it might look like it, choosing to engage in that act for safety or for food or whatever need it might be. But at the end of the day, if there is fear in that action, or if there is manipulation in that action, or if someone feels like they don't really have any other choice, what kind of a choice is it really? It isn't much of one. So yeah, I feel like I might have gone a little off with that, but
No, I think that's really,
we
really
see that
super
a lot.
helpful.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
appreciate that, because I feel like it's an area that people don't think about. We do get asked occasionally questions about it, and I think it's something particularly when you look at trafficking within some slightly more marginalized communities, like kids coming out of foster care or LGBTIQA kids who might leave home early or be forced out of their homes early. That survival sex can be a key element in the way in which they are brought into trafficking. So I really appreciate the clarification on that. Just to let everybody know, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. We would love to answer those questions. We are talking about human trafficking and content surrounding it. So if you need to take a moment to step away, this will be recorded. You can come back and watch it later if you're feeling more comfortable. But please be warned that there is some content surrounding trafficking and abuse within the course of this conversation. And also, if you missed it and you're watching the recording, you can always feel free to email me. I put my email in the comments below, and you can let me know what your question is, and I'll make sure to answer it. Or get Maddie to see if Maddie will answer it if I can catch her in time. But we'll get to that later. Red flags of trafficking. Let's talk a little bit about that. What are some warning signs? And I'm sure you get this question when you're doing trafficking presentations. What are some warning signs that someone is experiencing trafficking?
Yeah, so in general, a big warning sign would be like if somebody has a very controlling person in their life, especially if that person is trying to control who they see, who they spend their time with, who they're contacting, like even on the cell phone, maybe even what they're eating, what they do, what they wear. If that kind of controlling behavior is going on, that's certainly a red flag, because that is the behavior that traffickers exhibit a lot. They want to have full control of, unfortunately, the people they are trafficking. Again, traffickers see it like a business, and it's really awful, but they see the folks are trafficking as a commodity, so they want to have full control. Maybe more specific to like labor trafficking, as I mentioned, a lot of traffickers will take control of somebody's legal documents. Again, and I want to repeat, whether they are citizens or not citizens, or if they're, here temporarily, they will take any kind of documentation and hold it over folks' heads. So that could be a red flag of labor trafficking. Also, if somebody was recruited for work, and they're doing a job that is different than what they were promised they'd be doing, or if they're receiving pay that is different than what they were promised, that's obviously a red flag. That's fraud, and that's, dishonesty about their work conditions. And then for sex trafficking, sometimes a red flag could be if somebody is maybe working in an industry where it could be common to be pressured into performing sex acts for money. For example, places like strip clubs, go-go bars, or like massage businesses. Those are some industries that can lend themselves to, not lend themselves, but it could be a little more common for being for human trafficking, essentially. Those can be environments, that can be, I guess, a little more vulnerable to that. Again, not saying that every massage business, is likely to, have that going on. Not saying that every, bar or club has that going on, but those are the industries that we see it in a lot. And then another one would be, I already said that one. I have a whole list right here, trying not to go through it all. But yes, the number one thing at the end of the day is if there's a very controlling person in their lives, that can be a huge red flag.
Well, and just to follow up with that, then if we are, as members of the community, if we witness a situation where we think that there might be trafficking going on, what are good steps to take? How can we be the most help to that person who's being trafficked?
Well, there are a few things. It's certainly always good to know the National Human Trafficking Hotline. That is just 888-3737, 888. I've got it memorized, just in case of anything. So that's always good to kind of have on hand. I know, we're not, it's not like every single one of us can be superheroes in every single situation, but it never hurts, if you're feeling comfortable, if you feel like it's a safe environment to do so, you can always, go up to somebody if, if you see something kind of fishy going on, or if you see someone, in an environment where sometimes you can just tell there's something strange going on, or there's something not quite right. You can certainly, talk to them, see if, for example, maybe like if you're at the store or something, see if, security is available, to accompany that person. But in general, it's just really important to kind of be aware about what exactly human trafficking is. It's a very large topic that I'm still learning about as well. So being aware is a huge part of it, simply because the more of our community members are aware, the more eyes we have out there. And again, it's not necessarily every single person's responsibility to swoop in and save the day, but at least some of us are able to extend a helping hand, or, pull someone aside. Hey, are you okay? Do you need a ride? Do you need me to call somebody for you? So those are kind of some things that we can each do.
Thank you so much for that. Now, Maddie, we are sad that you are going to be leaving us here pretty soon to start a new role with the Humane Society, which congratulations on that.
Thank you.
But I did have a question for you in terms of the Willow as an agency. What would you like to see if kind of money and resources were no object? what would you like to see happen program-wise over the course of the next few years to strengthen the Willow's human trafficking program?
I think I would love to see probably some like therapeutic services, maybe more specifically for folks who've gone through human trafficking. It's a lot, going through trafficking is a lot like going through domestic violence, in the sense of you're kind of brainwashed, you're kind of brainwashed, and just all of the gaslighting and manipulation, it truly kind of it does something to folks. So I really think that therapy, offered through the Willow would be a really great thing. And then also maybe a support group more targeted towards human trafficking, folks who've gone through human trafficking, just, so they have just that extra support. It'll be really meaningful to also have it from other folks who understand exactly what they're going through as well. So I think those would be really cool to see.
Awesome. Well, once again, wish you the best of luck in your new role, and we're so sad that you're leaving.
Thank you. It's very
Really,
bittersweet.
yeah, it's really been wonderful having you as an advocate and a program member and a colleague. So, thanks.
Thank you.
Finally, before we go, I do like to do a little shout out segment. So, is there anything going on or anybody that you'd like to give a shout out to at this point?
Yes. First, I definitely want to shout out polarisproject.org. They have so many really good informational resources on human trafficking. They've got both, some fast facts, but they also have a lot more like in-depth reports and statistics about human trafficking. It's been really helpful to me as an advocate to kind of just learn more. And then also, let's do a shout out for the Willow. I've had a very formative and just a really great time, working here and everything. So I really appreciate every single person at the Willow. I've done a lot of growing and learning. So shout out to the Willow.
Well, thank you so much, Maddie. Really do appreciate it. Thanks to everyone who's joined us today. If you have any other questions, please feel free to give us a shout at 785-843-3333, or you can check out the Willow website, willowdbcenter.org/human trafficking. Thanks, Maddie. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Okay. Bye.